Welcome to Revenue Problem Solvers, where we crack the code on growing your business by tackling the challenges that keep revenue leaders up at night. I'm Carl Ortmans, and on today's episode, we're going to be diving into a challenge that is not unique to many revenue leaders or revenue teams: lead scoring. And how do I make sure we're working through the right leads? Now, Sixth Sense has some data that is shares that improving lead scoring makes a significant difference in your organization's bottom line. You'll have 4-time higher win rates, 2-time higher contract values, and even a 31% increase in your opportunity volume. The marketing automation platforms that exist today, they all do have lead scoring, and the emergence of platforms like Sixth Sense and others show that there's definitely a need for this topic and also to talk a little further. So with me today is Gary Amaral. So Gary and I connected, I want to say about 4 years ago at this point, through a local peer group. And the conversation really hasn't stopped. We've stayed very close. He's become a mentor for me. And it's been amazing. And Gary truly is a marketing craftsman. He is the co-founder and CMO of Breadcrumbs. He's the co-founder and CMO of Uncover. He's the co-founder and CEO of Resolute, and he's the founding member of Demandswell. So really, you're not very busy at all, Gary, and you don't do a lot during the day. But today, he's going to share some insights about things that transformed their company's approach to lead scoring. And it might actually just be the aha moment that you need to accelerate your business. But before we jump in, here's why this conversation matters. Imagine implementing one strategy from today's conversation and watching your revenue metrics shift within weeks, not months. That's exactly what our goal is of this podcast. Let's talk about revenue challenge that others have faced and how they've solved it. As I'd like to say, success leaves clues, and today we're going to highlight those clues for you. So let's solve some revenue problems. Now, before we jump in, Gary, is there anything that I may have missed as part of your intro? Because you do so much.
No, nothing. I don't think anything major. I do tend to keep busy. I appreciate the shout out to all of the businesses that I've been involved with recently. And today's topic is an interesting kind of bookend. So Breadcrumbs was my last startup. We exited in the fall of last year. So this is a nice way to kind of wrap up that chapter, because Breadcrumbs was a enterprise grade lead scoring platform designed for the masses. So it was really about bringing this methodology and this approach downstream so that it was accessible for every B2B company to use. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Nice. And I am too. So it's a good tee up for it. And also there's lots of questions that come into play, especially with the emergence of technology like AI. And I'm sure that's going to be part of the conversation. But if we can just set up, if you can share sort of what industries or verticals are you working in today? What are kind of the selling motions, size of companies you work with? So we can kind of like set the stage and then jump in.
Yeah, so my time is kind of split at the moment. I'm working with several companies as a fractional CMO, marketing advisor, whatever kind of label you want to put on it. And those companies, it's primarily B2B. That's my kind of sweet spot. I've been a B2B marketer for a long time. I do have some experience on the B2C side, but really love the B2B side.
Mm-hmm.
Companies that I've worked with range from 3 employees starting off to 20,000 employees. So I've really worked across the gamut, and supported all of the main motions, right? Whether it's sales led, product led, sales assisted, the motions. I'm agnostic to them, really. The marketing side is about feeding a funnel. The motion is about how do you get to the conversion. I'm comfortable with all of them. So
Nice. Awesome. Okay, so how did we get to this topic today for those of you kind of listening in for the first time? And so I like to ask the question to the guests. Hey, what is a revenue initiative, a successful revenue initiative that you've led or an existing problem that you're solving today? And this was the topic that came up. Well, it has to be the topic of lead scoring and what it came to. And I'm excited to talk about this journey. So when you think back to it, I mean, we don't have to say go into all of the specific details, but how did this issue of lead scoring become the issue that you were focused on? What led you down the path to focus on it versus some of the other initiatives? I mean, why was this successful? Like, let's try to unpack the lead scoring outcome and how you got there.
Yeah, it's funny. The answer is like it wasn't a big epiphany. Like to me, it was just
Hmm.
obvious, right? Like you're the goal of lead scoring is to identify, the individual, the audience that you are going to have the best chance of converting, right? Like
Hmm.
that's the broad definition, and that conversion can be many things. It could be buying something for the first time. It could be upgrading if you're an existing customer. It could be, adopting a feature. Like that conversion can be many things, but what you're looking for is like, what are the variables that identify the group or individual that is likely to take that action, right? And that those variables are a combination of like who is someone and what are they doing.
Hmm.
And to me, that's just the foundation of like marketing, right?
Hmm.
Who is it that we're talking to? What are the things that they're engaging with, or what are behaviors are they demonstrating that indicate to us that they are likely to do the thing that we want them to do? um, that was a pretty self-evident realization on my part, I think.
So if I
Yeah,
can maybe just ask you is was there a point where you had so many leads that you're like, I just need to narrow this down, or you had the type of leads you go, you know what, the qualification needs to be a little bit tighter, and I want to push, I want to make sure we're talking to the right audience and etc. Like, where did you sort of start the thesis or the situation and drive that into the end?
yeah. So the motivating factor varies at different organizations. The very first time I started playing with lead scoring was at BlackBerry many moons ago. Um, and the problem we were solving there was tons of customers, right? This
Hmm.
is I'm dating myself. There was a thing called Bez, BlackBerry Enterprise Server, and they sold a warranty program or a support program to go along with it. And it was like relatively small sticker amount, but very high margin.
Mm.
And there was a very clear, we eventually discovered that there was a very clearly defined profile of Bez customer, that if they demonstrated a certain series of actions, we're going to buy this thing,
Mm.
right? So but it was a sales assisted motion. There was no way to buy this without talking to a rep, right? um but reps want to move on to the next server deal, right? Because a server deal from a dollar perspective is many times more than the warranty deal, right?
Right.
So to incent the reps, we had to make it a slam dunk. Like if you pitch the warranty to these folks, they're gonna buy. Like we almost guarantee it.
Mhm.
Um, and so that was the motivation behind one of the initial lead scoring projects that I ever ran was like, hey, who do we offer the warranty program to? And the program that we designed was 80% accurate. So like of the audience that we defined, 80% actually took us up on the offer.
Hmm.
Um, and the reps loved it because it was just an easy add-on at that point. There was no real selling. They were primed to buy.
And so when you went into that, did you have to do, like, for those of you, for the people that are maybe thinking about, I'm going to improve my lead scoring, where did you start? You start from your customer base and did an aha and say, well, these are the types of customers. Did you look at the data and say, well, actually, we're seeing these types of clients come in and, maybe not converting? Where did you start and how come?
Yeah, totally. You totally start with the total kind of base customers and prospects, right? People that bought, people that did it, and you kind of do a regression analysis to determine, hey, what are the variables here that make people that don't buy look alike and make people
Mhm,
that do buy look alike. Where are there overlap between those variables so that we take away those confounding factors, and try to get to kind of distinct measures of like likely to buy, unlikely to buy,
mhm,
and then define the early days. It was kind of a test and iterate approach to defining like what is more predictive, right? Is it like a certain industry that's super risk averse, and that's really the primary driver? Is it a staffing issue, like organizations that are understaffed, they can't afford to deal with an outage or a service disruption on their own? At that point, it was very much like a test and learn.
mhm.
Now that organizations collect way more data, data is much more accessible, and we have access to like way better models. We can model a bunch of that out without going through the testing and learning. But ultimately, there's always a test and learn phase. It's
Mhm.
just now that things have evolved dramatically, those phases are much shorter. You can run through them much quicker, and you can get to way higher fidelity in the models.
And it lends very well into some of the things I continue to say is simple scales. And so when you started like with the mindset of simple scales is what it sounds like you did. How did it start for you initially? Did you pick 2, 3, 5 attributes? Did you pick 10? Like what did it look like to start,
We're
if
going
you
back.
remember?
We're going back a long time on the BlackBerry side.
Or let's
Um,
maybe rephrase it
we can
as if
fast
you
forward a little bit
yeah.
to Hootsuite, which is like Hootsuite is where like I really made a big bet on lead scoring as part of my career, and eventually that experiment at Hootsuite actually was the genesis point for Breadcrumbs as a
Mhm,
business. But at So the problem at Hootsuite, when I arrived there, it was really two businesses under one roof. There was the self-serve SMB focused offering,
mhm,
and then there was a sales assisted enterprise offering. And there was almost like an artificial wall between those two parts of the business in terms of
mm,
like the product roadmap was separate and distinct. The um, data between the two user bases was separate and distinct. Teams, there was teams dedicated to self-serve, there was teams dedicated to enterprise. Like it was very much two businesses under one roof.
mhm,
um, and the self-serve business was the much more mature, much more defined business. They had some like very deep understanding of their customers, um, up until a point, up until like that max value plan, which was $499 a month, I think at the time, or $399 a month. I don't remember. Once people hit that plan, they stopped like caring almost. Like they didn't really know uh what happens after, right? And there was no way, as much as the organization talked about a flywheel through the self-serve plans, right, from free trial up to that 399 499 plan, there was no extension of that flywheel into the sales assisted world,
mm,
right, into an enterprise deal. um, and my thesis was we're leaving money on the table because we have people paying us, call it $6,000 a year on the self-serve side, at the high end. And then we have customers paying us hundreds of thousands of dollars on the enterprise side, true enterprises, big companies, right? Large, mostly like multi-unit businesses like hotels and
mhm,
restaurants. Hospitality was big, that kind of stuff. But nothing in between.
Hmm.
We're like leaving this entire mid-market unserved. And so the genesis of the project was, hey, how do we better segment leveraging lead scoring all of these leads that are coming in, because many of the mid-market and enterprise leads were still coming in through free trial. How do we better identify who's actually a self-serve customer, who's an enterprise customer, and do we have mid-market customers, and should we be offering them something?
Hmm.
That was kind of the foundational reason why we kicked off this entire lead scoring thing. And there was like a very, the initial model was pretty simple. There was 6 or 7 fit attributes, like static attributes in terms of like job title, industry, geography, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And then probably about a dozen behavioral attributes, either like how they engage with us from a marketing perspective
Mhm.
or in product, or in product. It eventually became a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more complicated. We were able to get a little bit more accurate by adding some additional attributes on both sides of the model. But I don't remember the number anymore. I've shared the number in the past on previous podcasts, but it led to many millions of dollars in incremental revenue
Hmm.
once we got this up and running.
And so when you went through it, like there's this, maybe I'm sort of causing challenges as I say this, but when I hear, "Oh, what's your ICP?" There's two things that I think of ICP. There's ideal
Mhm,
customer profile and there's ideal
mhm,
customer persona. And
mhm,
we talk about them as the same. And it sounds like what you did is you said there's some firmographic around the company or the profile of the company, but you also
mhm,
talked about some of the attributes of the persona and the person.
mhm.
So, how do you blend those 2 together and say, "These are the key things we wanna look at and we're gonna test and iterate on"? Do you place a bet? How did you do that, and what did you look for?
They're nested in my mind, right?
Okay.
Like I think so you're right. Ideal customer profile to me is like the organization,
Mhm.
right? What firms look like that buy from us. And then nested within that is what are the personas that make up the buying committee that ultimately we need to engage with to drive a sale, right?
Mhm.
And different personas need to be treated differently, right? Like if there's somebody that comes in at Hootsuite, for example, if somebody came in and they were, let's call them a user,
Mhm.
right? Like they're a marketing coordinator or a junior level social media resource. They need to be informed. They're likely influencers, right? They likely influence the buying decision. They are not the buyer. And getting that person in front of a sales rep in a timely fashion is probably actually the wrong thing to do, right?
Mm.
Because you're wasting the rep's time talking to somebody who does not have any say in the buying decision formally, right? They don't hold the budget, they don't hold the authority. Like they're not the ones that are going to purchase.
Mhm.
Um, so being able to say, and this is like part of the evolution that breadcrumbs brought, right? Being able to say, hey, like the score at an account level is actually a function of how much of the buying committee we have engaged, right? And we would deliver lead level scoring, so at individual level, and we would deliver account level scoring, right? To say, hey, this account is primed because we have a bunch of people
Mhm.
engaged, right? This lead is not great because it's a coordinator, but this other lead is probably the person you should be reaching out to because they are a director, senior director, VP, whoever, the person likely to make the decision, right? Um, Not to say you don't engage with the coordinator, but you probably engage with them through digital touches as opposed to human touch, right? You drop them into some kind of drip campaign, nurture
Mhm.
campaign that's more about, how Hootsuite makes their life easier and allows them to accomplish their job faster and, allows them to report on results into the business in a way that makes their job more secure, like messaging relevant to that persona, that
Mhm.
member of the buying committee.
And so it leads really well into my next question. And I promise we didn't set this up. And the question is, who else was in, like, who did you have to involve from your team? Because it doesn't sound like this is a one person job. So who did you involve, and what was their role in trying to formulate this initial model for you to test and iterate on?
Like in the Hootsuite example?
Yeah, like, did you
Oh,
bring
like
in
the
demand
whole
gen?
business.
Was it product marketing? Was it sales? Like, how did you pull the people together to say, "Hey, look, this is what we're doing, and here's
Yeah.
why."
Yeah. Again, like a different time, right? Like this is 10 years ago at least. It involved everybody, right? So like you're engaging with the sales org to have this discussion around the definition of what looks good, right? In
Mhm,
terms of the different members of the buying committee, and you're negotiating the value of these different attributes. And um because remember, like this 10 years ago, right? Like not
yeah,
all the data was super accessible. At the same time as I'm having these conversations with sales, I'm having conversations internally with ops teams and product teams about, hey, like there's all of these attributes, all of these data points that would be super valuable for the model that I want to run, but they're like locked up in this data warehouse and I don't have access to it. Can we build a pipe from that into, at the time we were using Marketo, right?
right.
Can we build a pipe from the data warehouse into Marketo so that I can use these attributes in my model? Um, and like just to give you a sense of how early and how sophisticated this model was, we actually this was we did this before Marketo shifted from their own infrastructure to the Google Cloud,
Okay.
right? So they had their own, server farms,
Mhm,
data farms. We were on a pod, so this is what it was, a set of infrastructure dedicated to a group of customers.
mhm.
We were asking Marketo to process so much data and do so much computation that we took down that entire pod for like over a week,
Wow,
right? So like a bunch of Marketo customers had no service. We could not do our own lead scoring. Like literally, we found some internal hacks to keep our infrastructure running,
mhm,
but Marketo was not accessible for a week.
wow.
We basically broke Marketo. I was having daily conversations with the COO at Marketo at this point. And like that's what led to the creation of breadcrumbs, was like all of this experience in terms of like how siloed data is, like how these legacy platforms aren't actually set up to deal with this. There was real pains in building this. Getting through the pain led to really meaningful business outcomes.
Mhm.
But it was a very painful, very long road. Like this entire journey was a year and a half, probably. um
So
yeah.
you took down, you started a model, you worked through it with Marketo, you took it down, you included all the different teams, and it created something where you call breadcrumbs, which effectively was, I don't want to, is lead scoring on steroids a bad thing to say at this point?
No, I think that's a fair assessment.
And so it allowed you to highlight what those accounts were and how they're doing it. And I think you've mentioned that you've exited, it sounds like you've sold the business now, but
Mhm.
what what shifted for you? So now if we think about it today, so you solved it in a way where it sounds like you brought teams together. It sounds like you were able to nest the profile and the persona in a way that surfaced the best types of accounts and people.
Mhm.
Um, and and I do like the conversation around separating those, because there's going to be different parts. A CEO at a one-person company is a very very different score than a CEO at Microsoft, as a
Sure.
great example. They're gonna
Yeah.
be very different in terms of the numbers. So, the value in those, it does sound like, and so as you built the models, towards the very end, if I recall, because and you know what else, if I'm allowed to say this, but, uh, Gary, I was a customer of Gary's with
Mhm.
Breadcrumbs, where I
Mhm.
got to learn more about this, and one of the things that I really found fascinating when we went through the data and the models is we saw the same journey of somebody becoming a customer in terms of where they went, the pages they clicked, the scoring that they gave was almost the same, and I'll say almost the same because it was very linear to a customer that's about to churn.
Mhm.
And that was an aha for me to go, okay, well, how come? And how do we highlight those? So as you started to build those types of models and those types of insights, today we have technology like artificial intelligence and the emergence of clay and some of these others.
Mhm.
So a lot of the stuff you're talking about of like taking down places in the data lake in the warehouse,
Mhm.
how did AI, because I think it's a natural question, how did AI come into play towards the very end for you to maybe remove some of that, I don't want to say due diligence, but it kind of feels like due diligence to surface the right information for you to go, oh, there's some snapshots I'm going to build into the model. Did it come into
Mhm.
play? Didn't it? How did it look?
Yeah. So a couple things to highlight there. So one, let me make the comment about that, that discovery around like churn path and acquisition path actually looking super similar. We saw that at a ton of businesses, right?
Oh,
Now there's nuance, right? The somebody who's about to become a customer is like an in trial, for example. They may be visiting the users page often, but they're
mhm,
adding users, right? Whereas
right.
somebody who's churning is using the users page often, but they're like removing users, right? So there's like nuances in at the depths of that analysis. But yeah, like somebody who's buying is super interested in pricing. Somebody
Mhm,
who's leaving is also super interested in pricing. So they're probably looking at the pricing, but they're comparing it to the alternatives, right?
yeah.
These are like, again, to me, these are self-evident things, right? To many it's like, oh wow, I never even thought about that.
And
So
even on that, if I can even just interject, is when you start to look at, oh, this person's lead score jumped, it could jump to the right score, but for different reasons.
sure.
And so,
Yeah.
was there a way
Well,
for
and that's why we like, so back in the day, again, with Marketo, with HubSpot, you could build one model, right? And so when we built breadcrumbs, the idea was like, you should have many, right? Like
Mm,
you should be running an acquisition model. You might be running different acquisition models for different market segments, for different lines of business. You should be running a churn model. You should probably be building out some models to help with product adoption, like feature adoption, whatever. Like the expectation was that lead scoring would become a pivotal part of your business and help you with acquisition, retention, and expansion, right?
mhm,
um so the interesting thing, we sold the company, we had a little exit, everybody's happy. It wasn't the home run that we had all wished for and envisioned, and I think it's because we made a couple of fatal assumptions, and we were at a very interesting point in the evolution of technology,
mhm.
um, and the economy. I think it was three factors. So like we founded Breadcrumbs just as COVID was starting. So a big
Oh,
chunk of Breadcrumbs was during the COVID era.
mhm,
And there was tons of like market uncertainty, and businesses were behaving wildly differently from quarter to quarter, depending on what the latest news was about COVID. And it was a very interesting time. Um, Simultaneously, AI was like towards the tail end of the COVID thing, AI was starting to really pop off,
mhm.
right? And like today, it seems like AI has been around forever. Every conversation you get into with a business person or a technologist or whatever, AI is uttered. But AI wasn't talked about 4 years ago,
Right.
really, right? 5 years ago. Like I was talking about it. There was a small segment of marketers talking about machine learning and some of these precursors to um, precursor technologies, or like different terms for different aspects of AI. But it wasn't ubiquitous into the masses, right? And then, so you take those two factors, and then you take in the reality that breadcrumbs was really designed for a unicorn. It was designed for a marketer who was a true operator, who understood or cared about every aspect of the business and had a strong technical data bent,
Hmm.
right? And what we came to learn is that those people are far and few between, right? And so when you're dealing with the mass, kind of typical marketer, especially at the time that AI was popping off, the 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 expectation is that they would be able to like plug in their technology and like AI would magically solve their problems and magically define their customer and magically define the things that they do that are indicative of whatever, right?
Hmm.
Um, and we actually had CMOs like dictating that they would not buy a technology unless it was like fully AI, right? They couldn't define AI to you, but they would they would make an edict saying, "Hey, we're not buying tech unless it's AI."
Hmm.
And AI then couldn't do what they wanted it to do, and AI today still can't without being engineered appropriately, without having like really smart people guiding the evolution of that model,
Hmm.
right? And I think it's more understandable today. I think more people that play with ChatGPT and Perplexity, they understand that like, hey, like what I get out of these models, it's only as good as what I'm asking them and how I'm asking them, how I'm guiding it through the discovery. If I just ask a general question, and here's the example that I love to give, right? Like if you put in all of your data and into AI, right? Pick whichever AI you want, all of them.
Yep.
And your question was, what is my most profitable customer? What would it tell you?
Hmm.
Any guesses?
I would guess based on the number, the most profitable to probably tell you the highest value that they have in the system.
The highest like
Contract
revenue
value. So
number, like the highest deal size?
yeah,
Yeah,
because my
potentially.
my 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 intuition there is that you haven't asked it to say, here's what my cost of sale looks like, here's what my actual revenue looks like. Can you define for me who my actual customers are that give me the highest value? Because there's things that are questions that don't go into the model. How many, do I have a $10 a month customer that asks 40 support questions in a month every single month? Well, your acquisition cost has been, whatever cost you to acquire them, but now you're going to service them, and your lifetime value, what's your like, are you in the negative to have that customer? Maybe, but the
Yeah, listen,
prompting of the
you
answers.
you hit the nail on the head. Like I think it depends on. It's going to give you the best answer it can, based on the data that's available to it,
Mhm.
and based on whatever its interpretation of profitable is, right? But it doesn't guarantee that it's going to take into consideration, hey, what did it cost to acquire that customer? How, like, do we actually have a reliable LTV calculation on it? Do we know what the
Mhm.
cost to serve this customer is? Like, it's a function of are all the relevant data points there? And how is it interpreting your question in the first place, right?
Right.
And this is what most people they can't wrap their heads around, right? They we don't really have general AI yet, right? Which is what everybody kind of imagines, which is like,
Mhm.
hey, you ask this thing a question and it approaches the question like a human, right? It takes into all it rationalizes and analyzes and takes all of the different permutations into account, and it'll come back to you with what it should what most AI should do is come back to you with a question, right? And ChatGPT has actually gotten better at this. Eh? It's gotten to the point where like, hey, I need to know this, this, and this, and this, and this in order to like give you a better answer.
Mhm.
But most of the time, it just spits out an answer,
Right.
right? Um, and that tells you that it's not acting like a human, right? Because if somebody approached me with that question, I would have 20 questions for them before I could answer that question,
Right.
right? Like, what do you mean by profitable? What are you really trying to understand? Are you just trying to understand, revenue against, which one's driving the most revenue compared to everybody else? Are you looking at like, you want to understand cost to serve? Do you want to understand like, fully loaded cost to acquire? Like, how deep of an analysis do you really want
Right.
to answer that question? And when it comes to lead scoring, there's a bunch of those variables that you need to take into consideration when you're building out these models. And
Mhm.
if you're using AI to drive the creation of the model, if you're not informing the model with these variables, you're not going to get great results, right?
Mhm.
And one of the other headwinds we faced was we chose to focus on HubSpot because their lead scoring was very, I'll call it poor.
Mhm.
Um, and HubSpot decided to introduce functionality very similar to breadcrumbs,
Mm.
right? So we faced an existential threat from HubSpot. Well, we thought that they would potentially be, a partner, maybe an acquirer one day, and they actually became, they decided to compete.
Mm.
And part of what they're offering is was AI driven scoring, and a bunch of the platforms out. Salesforce with Einstein has AI powered scoring. There's a bunch of them,
Mhm.
and I can tell you anecdotally that I have yet to meet a marketer or an organization that uh, has fully adopted AI scoring out of the box from any of these places and used it to drive their business
Hmm.
because they don't trust it. They don't understand it, and quite often it's actually wrong, right? If you go back and do some analysis, it's actually wrong. Um, but like to put a bow on this conversation, the challenge is there's very few people left, in my opinion, in most organizations that actually want to take on that challenge.
Mhm.
And if you do find somebody, it's typically a data scientist who wants to take on the challenge for very different reasons than a business person would, right? And as a result, you end up with you end up mired in these like never ending internal data projects, instead of like functional scoring models designed to drive the business forward, right? Like
Mhm.
based on rapid iteration, based on like the business owners actually owning the model and being involved in it. And um, yeah, you end up in these like big,
Hmm.
overblown data projects that they make sense at certain organizations of certain scale,
Yeah.
but for the typical SMB mid-market into the lower end of the enterprise does not make sense most of the time.
And so let's, if we, because looking at the time, not to go too much further, and there's
Sure.
some questions. If we bring it back, there's two questions that sort of come into play for me. Is one, um, you brought a bunch of teams together, and I'd like to ask the question, you know, success leaves clues, or the comment of success leaves clues. But
Mhm.
also everybody likes new, nobody likes different. And when you do both at the same time, it can cause friction. So
Yeah.
how did you manage that change internally? And then the second thing is, I'll sort of preempt the question is, what are the, if you were to if you were to give somebody the insight or forthcoming to say, look, lead scoring is going to be an interesting thing for you, I want to help you with this, look for one, two, or three things. Like, what are the actionable things for anybody to kind of take a look at? Because simple scales, and like you talked about, complexity can easily come in, But if you start from a thesis and build up from that, it's a better approach. So there's two questions. How did you handle the change internally when you made this model? And then the second one is like, what are the couple of like ahas for you to suggest to somebody listening to launch lead scoring or improve their lead scoring? What would you tell them?
Yeah. So the change management thing, there's no one right answer in terms of how to handle change management. I think, I think I think a lot of it is about sales, to be quite honest. It's just an internal selling
Hmm.
process. And you need to identify who the stakeholders are. You need to identify what they care about, right? And you need to identify their kind of communication style, right? And then once you have those data points, you can formulate your plan. You know, I hate to use like plan of attack, but that's what it is, right? Like, how am I going to engage with these different stakeholders to get the outcome that I desire, but in a way that they feel like they're actually the ones that are winning. They're the
Hmm.
ones that are getting a benefit out of this, and they don't feel like they're taking on um, an unfair burden in order to accomplish this thing, right? So,
Hmm.
how do I make it as an easy of a lift as possible for them? How do I position it so that the lift is actually framed in terms of what they're going to get out of it, as opposed to what I'm going to get out of it, or what the nebulous organization is going to get out of it? And then how do I support them and pump their tires, you know, whatever it is that I need to do from a communication or relationship management perspective based on their style and their personality to get them to get moving
Hmm.
basically. Um, and then once you're at a point of critical mass, right? Once you're at a point where like the ball is rolling in the right direction, if you have some stragglers, which
Hmm.
you always do, then you have like the benefit of using some muscle if you have to, right? Because that always does. I feel that always happens. There's always one or two naysayers that are just like, stuck in their way, or just adamantly opposed. They don't want to take on the work, whatever it is.
Hmm.
Then you can use the inertia that you've built with everybody else to kind of drag those folks along.
Right.
So that's kind of my 30,000 foot view on the
Yeah.
change management thing. On the what would I do? I don't. We don't even have to frame it in terms of lead scoring, but if I was somebody and I needed to improve my funnel math, right? Like I need a better conversion from top to bottom.
Hmm.
And I was going to try and do that from a data driven way. Um, you know, keep it simple. The KISS, keep it simple. I'll leave the last word off. There is likely, I'll give this example. I showed up at Chargify, which is a subscription billing management platform
Yep.
in based out of San Antonio, Texas. I was VP of marketing there prior to starting Breadcrumbs. When I showed up there, the marketing organization was delivering 1,400 between 1,200 and 1,400 leads a month into the sales org.
Wow.
Okay, and the sales org was, I want to say, 5 or 6 sellers at that point. It was way too much volume,
Yeah.
way too much volume. And the sales team, even with all of that volume, were never hitting their numbers. Okay. So to me, there was two obvious problems. One, the numbers, like the targets, are probably off, right? They're probably too ambitious, or there's something wrong there.
Mhm.
Uh, Two, we're feeding the sales organization with either too many leads or too many leads that don't matter. I reduced the lead flow by just making some assumptions, right? I just looked at like close one deals and I'm like, okay, here's a bunch of stuff that I see consistently in close one deals. We're going to prioritize leads based on these, I think it was 4 or 5 things.
Mhm.
The lead number went down to like between 4 and 600 a month.
Okay.
Okay, but their attainment stayed the same,
Huh.
right? So like they were working way less leads, but they were like selling the same amount of business. Now, it didn't solve the problem that their attainment was under quota,
Mhm.
right? But that's a different conversation, right?
Yeah.
Like, is it a pricing problem? Is it a sales motion problem? Is it like what was the problem that was causing the underachievement from an attainment perspective?
Mhm.
But now we could like have a clearer discussion about it because we weren't saying, "Oh my god, like they have so many leads, but yet they're not winning." Well, yeah, because a bunch of the leads were junk in the first place, right? Like they should have never have been there,
Right.
right? Now, now that we know that, now that we know that they can sell the same amount of money with a third of the number of leads, why can't we sell more?
Mhm.
Right? Like, do we need to refine this down even further? Are they still too busy? That could be a problem. Are we underselling? Like, are we just transacting at the lowest price point? That ended up being one of the variables. Um, like we weren't actually selling, we were transacting.
Mhm.
So like that's something we can address, right? There's a bunch of things that we can talk about from a sales attainment perspective that isn't now being muddied by this huge, MQL number that was bullshit in the first place.
Right. That's
Yeah,
interesting. And
yeah.
sometimes it is just sort of looking at and saying less is more, and sometimes and it and taking that
Almost
approach.
almost every time, Carl.
Yeah. Less
Almost
is
every
more.
time.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the right targeting, the right conversations drives it. So, anyways, Gary, thank you for this. Let's if we can go, where if people wanted to carry on this conversation with you or learn a little bit more, where can they find you?
I'm everywhere. The easiest place is probably LinkedIn. I think
Okay,
you might have yeah, there you go. You can find me there super easily. You can just Google me, I'll pop up. Uh, yeah, and I'm happy to chat. If anybody, wants to dig into any of these topics, if anybody wants to challenge me on any of these views, if people just want to have a chat, feel free to reach out.
awesome. Well, that wraps up another episode of Revenue Problem Solvers. I really want to thank you, Gary, for coming on, sharing your insights. They're hugely invaluable, and they're also strategies that you can put into action immediately. Look at it, less is more, narrow it down. Remember, ICP isn't just one word. It's ideal customer profile, it's ideal customer persona, but they work together. So make sure that you're looking at it, um, and build your internal credibility and your internal selling to launch it. If you found value in today's conversation, please like the episode. If you subscribe wherever you listen to it, so you never miss an episode. If you have feedback, hey Carl, this is how you get better, tell me. Love to hear from you. If you have a topic, hey, I'd really like to learn more about this, or hey, I want to be I want to be a guest and talk to me about a topic. I'm all for it. I've really enjoyed these. Thank you for investing your time with us today. Remember, success leaves clues, and every revenue problem has a solution. Sometimes you just need the right conversation to find it. Until next time, it's Carl with Revenue Problem Solvers, helping you turn your obstacles into opportunities. Thanks for being with us today.